It was extremely diverse. There were many different genres of work. I think perhaps there was an increase in pieces that were made of multiple parts, many pieces put together to make a single work. I think this might reflect an increasing interest in working in a more intimate way with clay, working with your hands, making smaller pieces, but then wanting to assemble them into a larger statement. The trends in this year's entries, I think that probably, although there was great diversity in the entries, I mean, it represented an extraordinary range of work, from handmade tableware through to very large-scale sculptural pieces. There was perhaps an increase in the number of works that were made out of smaller parts, then assembled to become larger works. And I think this is out of an increasing desire that people are feeling worldwide to work more intimately with clay, to work closely with their hands and assemble large works out of it. We've seen some with the multiple part figurative works, very, very large animals formed by very small pieces of clay suspended in space. The other thing is that we see two, maybe three works all up, that are made out of unfired clay. And I think that this reflects an increasing awareness of the amount of energy that we use when we are making ceramics. So we don't need to fire everything that we make. We don't need to use those enormous energy resources to make something that is then fixed, can't be really easily recycled, can only ever be that work. I think that the two works that are actually in the on-site exhibition that are of that kind, and both of them are relying on time as well as the actual physical work itself to be part of the making of the work. It's interesting that in the past, maybe 10 years ago, one saw quite a bit of video work. That was not nearly as apparent this time, and so time-based works were actually in real time. So there were things like clay drying, clay being broken down by its own sweat, which was much more about natural processes rather than technological recording of time as an event. The most important criteria, of course, always is excellence, but what do we mean by excellence? I think that concept remains paramount. So the idea behind the work is the most important thing. How well expressed that idea is, how relevant it is today. But that needs to be coupled with a high level of craftsmanship. And by a high level of craftsmanship, I'm not talking about things that are unbelievably skilled, because skill is only one part of craftsmanship. Craftsmanship is using the appropriate techniques and levels of skill to deliver the concept. So if you have tableware, for example, you want the tableware to be able to be used, and used in an absolutely appropriate way. So you don't want to have it sharp and unpleasant to touch. You don't want to have it catch food in crevices. So all of those things are things that skill can fix up. But beyond that, you also want to talk about the idea of dining and the idea of eating. And each of those things also underpins sculptural work, even if it's a mixed media sculptural work, where you might have machinery forming a large part of the work, and the machinery standing for, in some respects, both society and the individual functioning in a marginal way, as we saw in one of the works. So I think all the time it's talking about how effectively the artist has taken their concept and realised it through the use of craftsmanship and clarity of thinking. I think that's really important. I would like to add to that with a jury as diverse as we are, of course we all bring to it our different cultural backgrounds, our different experiences and our different priorities. And that's the whole reason for having a jury as opposed to a single person making the decision. And we had some quite tough discussions, about taste versus excellence, because of course you have to put aside personal taste and try and look at the work in an international context, but take it to a more international audience perhaps. I'll answer this first of all by saying that as an artist, one of the things that I look at, because I spend a lot of time in China and I feel very at home there, I have good friends, I know places where I work and stay, and in Australia of course I am quite at home, and I work quite a lot with Aboriginal artists in Central Australia. I work on a couple of projects there, and sometimes I find myself very divided. And I think, where is home? Where is home? So the work I'm making at the moment, in my artist statement, I say that I am seeking to find a kind of decoration on the work that is culturally specific. So it pulls things that you look at and you say, oh, that's Chinese. And then you say, oh no, that's Australian. So they're still culturally specific, yet it's borderless. So we don't draw a line between. So I think in ceramics, the Korean ceramic culture is so strong, and it underlies both Japanese and also in a reciprocal way a lot of Chinese culture. I mean, there's been a lot of borrowing between your two countries, but there are certain things that I look at when I look at a white slip decoration on a coloured clay with sgraffito through it. I immediately think of punjong. When I look at celadons, you know, I'll immediately think of Corail celadons. When I look at a jar of this shape, particularly where I can see it joined in two like an equator around the moon, I think of moon jars. So I think that often when we make things, we take from other cultures anyway. I mean, there's a history of borrowing in Eastern Asia anyway, of ceramic culture. And I think what happens is you don't lose the culture by becoming hybridized. I don't think that that's a loss. It's an interesting fact that when people migrate from their home country, they travel to the new country, and often because they feel separated, they hold on to their culture much, much more than the people at home do. And so that becomes a very conservative kind of enclave with a very particular view. Meanwhile, back home, the country has moved on. I think that you have to accept the fact that hybridity is a natural phenomenon. It happens throughout the natural world, and we're part of that world. If you try and stop it, what you do is you risk losing it, because it will die. Just as things die in nature if they don't hybridize, because they become isolated and unable to live anymore. So I think what's really important is to go out and share that. And I think of the number of times that we have had artists in Australia, they come to Korea because of the history of ceramics here, and research it, and then they take it home. But we haven't had many Korean artists come and look at what's happening in Australia or perhaps in other countries. And so perhaps what needs to happen is that your artists need to be assisted to go out and show us what they do, show a broader audience, because that opens up the field for what I would call a healthy hybridity. I would love to see, I tried with one of our national conferences to get 4 Korean artists, some of whom are represented in this exhibition, to get them to come for one of our conferences so that we could have a kind of Korean focus, and we could not get money to bring Korean artists from Korea to Australia. We could only get money to take Australians to Korea. So something needs to happen here to support your artists, bringing what they know to the world. Yeah. Well, I think that they're already doing it. One of the things is that this Biennale has always stood for excellence. It's a kind of the benchmark of ceramic competitions in the world. It's always had such a big program of events associated with it. I think that's really important. I talked at a meeting yesterday about how when you have excellence, it's what's at the top of the triangle. But at the bottom of the triangle, you need to have a broad base to support that excellence. Otherwise, it becomes isolated and it doesn't mean anything to the broader culture. So engaging with people. It used to be in the past that there were lots of children's programs. Children were involved in the courtyard here, and there were opportunities to engage with clay, to watch people working. So I think all that sort of activity is tremendously important. I think also the push, and this is a very conscious desire of COSEF, is to have a stronger online presence and to have that website a very, very active, engaged, two-way website. And to do that, you have to use social media. Whether you like it or not, you have to use social media. What platform you use is a matter for discussion. Probably all platforms you use, because a variety of people will use different platforms. A lot of young people use Instagram. That's their major source of image information anyway. Facebook is still used very widely for text discussion and special interest groups. And also you can have a number of other platforms where you can have podcasts and other active download sites. So I think that sort of thing is really, really important, because that extends the importance of the Biennale beyond the period of the Biennale, because you can archive so much of that, and people then can go back and they can say, oh well, so-and-so won it this year, let's have a look at who won it 5 years ago or 6 years ago or 8 years ago or 10 years ago, and make comparisons with it, you know, how's it changed? And then it becomes actually a very useful resource, and once it becomes a useful resource, it has a new life. And that's what we all need to do. When a thing has been going for 20 years, it is time to have children. I would say to the artists, as an artist myself, well done. Just getting to the point where you make the entry. To have work, have the photographs, fill in the entry form. In a busy life as an artist, that's a really, really big hurdle. It's a big thing to do. So congratulations to everybody who entered, because the competition was very stiff. To see that much work, I think there were about 1,700 entrants, I think something like 1,700, and they had up to 6-10 slides each, so there were over 10,000 images we were looking at. So that's a lot of work, and the quality of it was very impressive. So I would say well done to those. To all of those who were selected for exhibition, whether online or on site, again, congratulations, because that's a very select group. We had a lot of argument and a lot of discussion about that. Those who were selected for on-site, they were selected on a slightly different criteria, because we regard it really as one exhibition, the on-site and online. But we looked at works that would benefit by their physical presence, and those that still talked enough about their physical presence in the images online. And what we wanted to do was to create a very rich visual experience that was like a summary of the selection for those who actually come and visit the museum and see the show. So to all of the visitors who come here, keep in mind that this is the tip of an iceberg, a very, very big and excellent iceberg.